Greetings, my fellow knights. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on one of history's most secretive societies, the Illuminati. Before you drift into comfort, take a second to like and subscribe, and share in the comments what kind of mysteries or tales you'd like to hear next. I always enjoy watching our nightly circle grow. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Antecedents in Faith, Reason, and Secrecy. The earliest origins of the Illuminati lay in a mix of older spiritual movements, new intellectual currents, and the spread of private associations that structured themselves around secrecy. The word Illuminati appeared in Europe before the 18th century, attached to small groups that emphasized inner enlightenment or special knowledge. In parallel, the Enlightenment moved through universities, coffee houses, salons, and academies, promoting reason, debate, and reform. The later Bavarian order, led by Adam Weishaupt, grew out of these intersecting strands rather than out of an ancient, unbroken lineage. Stories of uninterrupted descent from antiquity existed, yet reliable evidence for such chains was not present. What could be documented with clarity was a pattern. Individuals who valued knowledge, discipline, and moral improvement often gathered in structured circles and adopted names that suggested light and insight. From those patterns, the specific form taken in Bavaria emerged as a regional expression of broader European changes. The settings for those antecedents were varied. In 16th century Spain, the Alumbrados appeared in scattered towns and cities and drew the attention of the Inquisition. In the German lands, the 17th century saw the publication of Rosicrucian manifestos, which circulated through printing centres in places such as Kassel and Frankfurt. In 18th century Britain and the continent, lodges of Freemasons spread from London and Edinburgh into Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and many smaller capitals, often meeting in inns and private halls. In Bavaria, a Catholic electorate with close ties to the Habsburg orbit, the University of Ingolstadt educated clerics and jurists under Jesuit influence and maintained conservative standards. Those landscapes overlapped with the trade routes of books and letters, where ideas crossed borders more easily than people. The precise chains by which certain texts and rumours moved from one milieu into another were not always recorded, but the general flows were visible in correspondence, journals, and catalogues of learned societies. The principal figures came from different spheres, but together outlined the world that produced the Bavarian Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt, born in 1748 in Ingolstadt, studied under Jesuit teachers and became a professor of canon law in 1772. Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Society of Jesus in the 16th century, represented the pedagogical system that trained clergy and elites throughout Catholic Europe, including Bavaria. Johann Valentin André, a Lutheran theologian associated by later tradition with Rosicrucian writings, stood as a symbol of the playful yet serious proposals for moral and scientific reform circulating in the 17th century. Christian Wolff, a rationalist philosopher, taught a methodical style of reasoning that influenced German universities and was discussed for decades. Immanuel Kant represented the philosophical turn toward critical inquiry and self-legislation, even though his most famous works appeared slightly later than the period at hand. Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, a dramatist and critic, engaged publicly with the symbols of Freemasonry and used them to discuss virtue and tolerance. Pope Clement XIV, who suppressed the Jesuits in 1773, directly affected the academic life of Ingolstadt by removing the order that had dominated its teaching. In Bavaria, Elector Maximilian III Joseph presided over a polity that valued Catholic orthodoxy and was cautious toward new fashions. These names did not form a single chain of influence, yet they marked the institutions, texts, and attitudes that framed Weishaupt's early life and options. The sequence of key events began long before Weishaupt's birth. In the early 16th century, the Alumbrados in Spain pursued an interiorized spirituality that reached for direct illumination. The Inquisition investigated them, and many adherents recanted or faded into other circles. The term Illuminati entered documents in that context, and later attached itself to different groups, sometimes with little direct connection. In the early 17th century, the publication of the Fama Fraternitatis and related Rosicrucian manifestos ignited debates about a hidden brotherhood devoted to spiritual and scientific reform. The manifestos outlined a plan for disciplined study, charity, and secrecy, and they invited responses. Printers issued rebuttals and defenses, and readers speculated whether the society existed or was a literary device. The controversy showed that European readers were ready to imagine concentrated networks of improvement working behind the scenes. In 1717, lodges in London formed a Grand Lodge, and the Masonic model of graded membership, ritual instruction, and moral discourse began to spread. By the 1730s and 1740s, Freemasonry had reached many German cities. Lodges taught moderation, charity, and rational conversation, and they often aligned with enlightened elites who accepted monarchical authority while seeking reforms. In the German lands, universities digested rationalist and empiricist ideas through lectures, disputations, and student clubs. Wolff's method, with its emphasis on clarity and demonstration, set a pedagogical tone in many faculties and attracted both praise and backlash. In Bavaria, the University of Ingolstadt stood as a stronghold of Jesuit pedagogy, which trained students in scholastic reasoning and moral theology. Adam Weishaupt grew up inside that structure. After becoming a professor in 1772, he taught in a faculty where Jesuit influence remained embedded in habits and textbooks even as the order faced external pressure. When Pope Clement XIV suppressed the Jesuits in 1773, state authorities reorganized academic life. New patrons and bureaucrats stepped into the vacuum, and some professors explored broader reading lists. Censorship still existed, and religious orthodoxy remained public policy, but the boundaries shifted. Meanwhile, Masonic lodges in nearby regions recruited officials and officers and exchanged papers. Lessing's writings drew attention to the ethical language of Freemasonry, and readers in German cities discussed its uses for moral pedagogy. In Ingolstadt, printed journals arrived from Leipzig, Berlin, and Vienna, bringing news of societies and philosophical debates. Within that environment, Weishaupt weighed the instruments available for moral reform. He accepted the Enlightenment's emphasis on reasoned improvement, and distrusted what he viewed as empty ritual or uncontrolled enthusiasm. He also acknowledged the strength of disciplined pedagogy and the practical power of organizations that trained members through stages. Freemasonry offered a model of sociability and instruction, but did not, in his opinion, apply a rigorous plan for comprehensive reform. Jesuit education offered structure and reach, but belonged to a theological project that he did not share. Rosicrucian tales offered inspiring language but lacked verifiable continuity. The Spanish example of the Alumbrados showed how claims of illumination drew rapid suspicion and did not produce durable institutions. In response to these examples, he began to imagine a system that would combine careful selection of members, progressive instruction, discreet oversight, and clear ethical goals. In his private notes, he compared different degrees of discipline and thought through how to guard loyalty and test character. He also considered the political climate of Bavaria, where authorities balanced a desire for order with controlled openness to improvement. The precise content of his earliest drafts was not fully preserved, but contemporaries later recalled that his plan matured through conversations with students and colleagues. The broader cultural context included many uses of the word Illuminati, which did not refer to a single continuous body. Spanish Alumbrados in the 16th century, scattered French Illuminés in later decades, and various mystical or pietist circles used related language to suggest inner light. Freemasons used light as a metaphor for knowledge, and many initiation rituals staged the movement from darkness into light as an emblem of education. Later writers claimed that the Bavarian Illuminati drew from ancient Egyptian mysteries, Greek initiations, or medieval knightly orders, yet the available documentary record did not support those precise genealogies. What could be traced were the local circumstances of Bavaria, the training of Weishaupt, and the pan-European habits of association that prized secrecy as a means of shaping character. Against that background, the name Illuminati carried a familiar aura and helped signal a program of disciplined enlightenment. The origins of the Bavarian order belonged to this pattern of faith, reason, and secrecy that had developed over centuries, and those strands set the stage for the form it later took. Chapter 2: Enlightenment Seeds and Secret Circles. Before 1776, Enlightenment thought, old forms of sociability, and new habits of secrecy shaped the earliest environment from which the Illuminati later emerged. Philosophers promoted reason, education, and reform, while governments, churches, and universities controlled the spread of ideas through censorship and privilege. Between the early 18th century and the mid-1770s, voluntary associations and discrete networks offered places where readers, officials, and students discussed contested topics out of public view. In this setting, codes, rituals, and graded memberships became practical tools that allowed conversation to continue without immediate interference. The resulting culture of organized secrecy did not produce a single unified movement. It produced overlapping circles with different goals and styles. Some emphasized moral improvement and charity. Others cultivated esoteric symbolism or hinted at hidden lineages. All of them contributed habits, language, and forms that later actors could adopt or modify. The intellectual vocabulary of the Enlightenment supplied a set of aims. The social institutions of the era supplied methods. Together they prepared the ground for a new order that would claim illumination as both purpose and identity. The places that mattered included cities, courts, and universities across the German-speaking lands, along with major centers in Britain, France, and Italy. Hamburg, Berlin, and Vienna hosted active lodges and salons. Frankfurt and Leipzig supported booksellers and journals, which circulated essays and translations. Ingolstadt, Würzburg, and Munich, among other Bavarian towns, housed colleges subject to close clerical oversight, while Prussian universities in Halle and Königsberg were known for more open debate. Borders were porous for books, letters, and travelers, even when governments tried to block certain titles. Confessional divides shaped the map. Protestant regions permitted wider literary exchange, while Catholic regions often relied on ecclesiastical censors. Bavaria remained conservative, and its university at Ingolstadt maintained a strong Jesuit presence until the 1770s. At the same time, postal routes, Masonic lodges, and reading societies linked places that differed in law and religion. Patterns of war and diplomacy, such as the War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War, dislocated people and ideas, then resettled them in new contexts. The overall result was a dynamic but uneven communication system that encouraged careful planning for anyone who wanted to discuss contested doctrines. Several figures stood out as exemplars or organizers in this landscape. Adam Weishaupt, born in 1748 in Ingolstadt, trained in law and moral philosophy under teachers connected to Enlightenment reform, including Johann Adam von Ickstadt, who promoted curricular change at the University of Ingolstadt. Weishaupt worked within a Catholic setting shaped by Jesuit pedagogy and discipline, and he developed strong interest in secular ethics, natural law, and the improvement of civic life. Frederick II of Prussia supported intellectuals and protected Freemasonry, creating a royal model of guarded tolerance that other rulers watched with interest. James Anderson, a Scottish minister, authored the Constitutions of the Freemasons in 1723, which provided a foundational text for Masonic organization and spread across Europe in translation. Karl Gotthelf von Hund established the Strict Observance, a German high-degree Masonic system that claimed a Templar heritage and imposed tighter internal discipline. Literary figures, including Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, defended reasoned religion and civil discussion, and contributed to a public sphere that overlapped with private associations. These names mark different parts of the same system. Weishaupt represented an ambitious young scholar in a controlled Catholic state. Anderson stood for the codification of a fraternal model. Von Hund reflected the attraction of elaborate claims and hierarchical structure. Frederick II showed how princely power and private societies could coexist. Together, their roles sketched a set of relationships that informed organizational choices across the region. Key developments unfolded in linked stages. Freemasonry spread from Britain to the continent in the 1720s and 1730s, supplying a framework for private meetings, moral lectures, and charitable works. Lodges in Hamburg began operating in 1737, and similar bodies appeared in Berlin and other cities. The circulation of Anderson's constitutions offered a sense of transnational affiliation that crossed confessional and political boundaries. In the 1740s and 1750s, high-degree systems added new layers to the basic structure, giving initiates ranks beyond the initial 3 degrees, and introducing narratives about ancient wisdom or medieval knighthood. In parallel, reading societies and learned associations multiplied, especially in Protestant towns, where less stringent censorship allowed periodicals and debates to flourish. Catholic regions maintained tighter controls, but private circles formed there as well, including student gatherings and professional networks that relied on discretion. The Jesuit order administered many Bavarian institutions and enforced curricular orthodoxy. Yet Jesuit schools also trained students in rhetoric, discipline, and argument, skills that graduates later used in secular contexts. The 7 Years' War disrupted travel and trade, but widened familiarity with foreign practices and texts. By the early 1760s, educated Europeans could find or form a lodge, a reading society, or a salon in most major centers, and they could write to counterparts in distant cities through established correspondence routes. A noted shift occurred in the 1760s and early 1770s. The strict observance grew rapidly in German lands, attracting nobles and officials with its noble ranks, promises of hidden direction, and claims to an older mandate. Its strict obedience and elaborate rituals gave participants a sense of order and belonging, but it also raised doubts among those who favored a simpler ethic of rational improvement. At the same time, Rosicrucian revivals offered alternative esoteric paths, especially among Prussian and Saxon elites. Printers and publishers expanded the market for philosophy, history, and natural science, while censors tried to keep pace. In 1773, Pope Clement XIV suppressed the Society of Jesus, dissolving the order across Catholic Europe. In Bavaria, that event removed a key administrative pillar from schools and colleges. The change opened opportunities for non-Jesuit professors and altered the balance of authority at Ingolstadt. Weishaupt advanced within this new context. receiving appointments that placed him in public view and responsibility. He read French and German works that questioned ecclesiastical power and promoted civil freedom. He watched local and regional lodges debate high-degree systems and pedigrees that he considered distracting or misleading. He encountered student groups eager for disciplined improvement but uncertain where to turn. The combination of loosened institutional control, growing interest in private reform, and competition among secret systems presented both practical tools and pressing challenges. These developments shaped an outcome that mattered for later events. By the mid-1770s, the concept of a methodical, rational, discrete association was familiar and attainable in many places. The techniques were known: graded initiation, statutes, rules for correspondence, use of pseudonyms, and careful minutes. The audiences were present: students, officials, clergy, merchants, and minor nobles who desired intellectual formation, patronage, or moral community. The obstacles were clear: censorship, confessional suspicion, rival systems, and the hazards of imprudent speech. Weishaupt formed opinions about these instruments and obstacles. He favored a disciplined pedagogy over ornate mythology, and he imagined an association that would guide members from basic moral instruction toward public usefulness. He chose to work within the margins of legality by adopting familiar forms of privacy rather than openly challenging state authority. He surveyed the Masonic landscape and considered the advantages of cooperating with lodges while maintaining a separate curriculum and aim. He identified recruitment pathways among students and young professionals in Bavaria and neighboring regions. The details of his earliest plans were not recorded in full. He prepared a structure that drew upon the era's available models while rejecting parts he considered flawed, and he began to act on that plan amid the competitive and watchful world of German secret societies. The broader cultural context varied by region and by memory. In Protestant territories, some chroniclers emphasized the continuity between lodges, reading societies, and civic reform, while in Catholic territories, clerical records focused on the risk these circles posed to ecclesiastical authority. Later accounts disagreed on the extent to which Masonic systems, Rosicrucian revivals, or Jesuit pedagogy directly shaped the new order in Bavaria. Surviving sources agreed on the basic environment: an enlightenment that valued reasoned improvement, a social habit of private association, and a political need for cautious organization. Within that environment, persons like Weishaupt studied, worked, and planned. The combination of open debate and guarded practice yielded institutions that trained members in discretion, argument, and mutual assistance. As the early 1770s turned toward the middle of the decade, the stage had been set for the appearance of a group that identified illumination as its central theme and that drew upon the established patterns of its age. Chapter 3: Ingolstadt and the Order's Early Growth. The Bavarian Illuminati took shape as a formal organization dedicated to reasoned reform and moral improvement. Its founder identified a path that combined private instruction with discreet association, and this method defined its early character. The order sought to cultivate virtue, reduce the sway of superstition, and foster practical enlightenment in public life. Its structure grew from a simple circle into a layered system of degrees, each designed to shape a member's habits, outlook, and sense of duty. The name Illuminati became its common label, though the group used several designations during its formative years. In clear terms, it functioned like many learned societies of its era, yet it relied on secrecy to protect members and ideas in a climate wary of reform. During its first decade, it assembled a broad network in German-speaking lands, organized correspondence, and built routines for recruiting and training. Its inner councils deliberated on doctrine and strategy, while local cells met quietly and focused on education and mutual support. The order's early growth established practices that shaped all of its later developments. The founding occurred in 1776 in the Electorate of Bavaria, with the University of Ingolstadt as the initial setting. The university retained a strong clerical legacy that influenced its intellectual environment. The suppression of the Society of Jesus in 1773 had left a transitional moment in Bavarian education, and this change set the scene for new networks to appear across faculties and student circles. Bavaria's government monitored dissent and regulated the press, and religious authorities spoke against perceived heterodoxy. Political institutions in Munich emphasized order, and the court of Charles Theodore maintained careful oversight of associations. The wider German lands contained free cities, princely states, and varied jurisdictions, which made cross-border cooperation common yet delicate. Lodges, salons, and reading societies had already provided models for meeting, learning, and mutual encouragement. Within this mixture of caution and curiosity, the Illuminati defined a private space for ethical instruction and reform-minded conversation. The central figure was Adam Weishaupt, a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt. who founded the order and acted as its chief organizer. He set its early statutes, crafted reading programs, and assigned symbolic names to people and places. His closest collaborators formed a council called the Areopagus, which supervised the order's direction and correspondence. Adolf Freiherr von Knigge, an experienced Freemason and writer, joined in 1780 and became the principal architect of the degree system and recruitment strategy beyond Bavaria. Knigge brought organizational skill and access to Masonic networks, which enabled expansion across German territories. Franz Gave von Schwark, a Bavarian official, handled much of the administrative work, archiving correspondence and maintaining internal records. Johann Christoph Bode, a respected figure in Freemasonry, later offered advice and mediation when tensions arose among the leadership. Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg supported reformist causes and provided a sympathetic environment, which gave the order a valuable ally. These figures formed a working core that blended university circles, administrative expertise, and Masonic connections into a single coordinated effort. The order began as a small circle of students and academics at Ingolstadt. Weishaupt designed initial degrees that introduced novices to moral and philosophical study. The Minneval degree emphasized self-discipline, reading, and discreet conduct, drawing on classical imagery of wisdom. Early meetings took place quietly, with simple rites, lectures, and discussions. In these sessions, members reported on their progress, shared observations, and reinforced the aim of rational self-improvement. The group refined rules of secrecy, employed ciphers for letters, and used code names for cities and members to reduce risk. As the network stabilized in Bavaria, Weishaupt sought to expand beyond academic circles. He recognized that Freemasonry offered a ready-made framework for social contact across many towns. By 1780, Knigge adapted the order's degrees to align with Masonic expectations while preserving the Illuminati's goals. This change encouraged Masons to join and allowed the order to enter lodges and form parallel cells. The revised degree system created a path from basic instruction to higher responsibilities, with each step designed to evaluate character and commitment. Expansion accelerated as Knigge and others visited lodges, corresponded with leaders, and established new circles. Reports flowed to the Areopagus describing progress in recruitment, the reliability of new members, and the character of local conditions. The order adopted systematic methods for assessing candidates, including recommendations, written assignments, and probationary periods. By creating clear rules for advancement, the leadership aimed to ensure loyalty and competence. The network spread into cities such as Munich, Frankfurt, and Gotha, and reached into parts of Saxony and Thuringia. Its membership included officials, scholars, military officers, and professionals who valued discretion and reform. Estimates of total members varied across sources, and the exact number remained unknown. The order participated indirectly in Masonic gatherings and corresponded with figures who could advance its position. The Congress of Wilhelmsbad in 1782, a significant Masonic event, provided opportunities for contact and influence, though the specifics of control remained limited and dependent on local circumstances. By the mid-1780s, the order functioned as a network of affiliated cells linked by regular guidance, shared texts, and a graded curriculum. Growth brought disputes over methods and authority. Weishaupt emphasized strict supervision by the Areopagus and consistent application of doctrine. Knigge advocated broader alliances, a more expansive degree system, and pragmatic compromises with Masonic bodies. Differences also arose over the symbolic content of higher degrees and the balance between practical moral training and elaborate ritual. Correspondence recorded sharp disagreements, and mediators such as Bode tried to keep cooperation intact. Pressure from outside increased as clergy warned about hidden associations and officials took notice of coded letters and unusual meeting patterns. The order adjusted by revising instructions, urging caution, and reducing written traces in sensitive areas. By 1783 and 1784, internal tensions led to formal inquiries and attempts at reconciliation. Knigge resigned his leadership role, and his departure marked a turning point in the order's structure and momentum. At the same time, authorities in Bavaria discussed stricter controls on secret societies, which narrowed the space for private associations. The Illuminati still held a wide network and coherent procedures, but its leadership unity had thinned and its public environment had grown less tolerant. Sources that documented the early years reflected varied perspectives and later controversies. Internal papers, when preserved, showed pragmatic training materials and ordinary administrative concerns. Government edicts and ecclesiastical writings emphasized risks to public order and religious life. Later accounts in the 19th and 20th centuries often exaggerated scope and influence, mixing known facts with speculative claims. Reliable scholarship treated the Bavarian Illuminati as a specific Enlightenment-era secret society rooted in the university world of Ingolstadt. joined to Masonic networks and active mainly in the German lands. Exact membership counts and comprehensive rolls did not survive, and some details of meetings and local cells remained unknown. Within those limits, the picture of the founding and early growth remained clear, a structured effort to cultivate reason and virtue through discrete association, guided by a small leadership circle with complementary strengths. In its early maturity, the order stood at a high point of reach and ambition, poised between consolidation and confrontation as the political climate tightened around it. Chapter 4. After the ban. Dispersal, documents and the birth of a legend. The aftermath of Bavaria's suppression of the Illuminati introduced a new phase in the history of the order, one defined by flight, confiscated papers, public controversy, and a gradual transformation from organized fraternity to enduring story. The formal structure that had once linked lodges and correspondence unraveled, while the name survived in journals, pamphlets, and debates. Police searches produced archives that illuminated the internal life of the order, and these writings, once secret, reshaped public understanding of its aims and methods. Critics used the materials to build broad arguments about sedition and subversion, and sympathizers tried to rescue parts of the program by rephrasing them as general reform. As Europe entered the final years of the 18th century, the Illuminati became both less visible as an organization and more present as a subject of commentary. The gap between documented activities and reported influence widened, and it created a field where competing narratives developed. The historical record held clear dates and names. The wider reputation moved in step with the era's political storms. Over time, the historical Illuminati remained a closed episode with a clear beginning and end, while the imagined Illuminati continued as a theme that adapted to each era's concerns. The dispersal of members, the published documents and the polemical books formed the bridge between the two, and they set the pattern that later generations would follow when they tried to explain movements they did not understand. The setting for this phase lay in several German states, beginning with the Electorate of Bavaria in the mid-1780s, and extending to the duchies of Thuringia, as well as to cities such as Weimar, Hamburg, and Gotha. Police actions and edicts in Munich and Ingolstadt initiated the collapse. Archival seizures continued in Landshut and other towns where members had kept correspondence. North of Bavaria, quieter havens appeared under rulers who tolerated Freemasonry and scholarly circles, and these places hosted a few displaced members. The controversy soon reached Paris and London, where printers discussed the seized papers and their meaning for the French Enlightenment and for Freemasonry. It also crossed the Atlantic to the northeastern United States, where sermons and pamphlets brought the term into local politics. The timeframe began with edicts in 1784 and 1785, moved through the key searches of 1786 and the government publication of 1787, and then branched into the revolutionary years of the 1790s and the first wave of polemical books in 1797 and 1798. The geography and timeline were scattered but connected by print and correspondence. The principal figures of this period included Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the order, and a former professor at the University of Ingolstadt, who lived in exile after the ban. Franz Xaver von Zwack served as a central organizer before the crackdown, and his papers became an important source for investigators. Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, a translator and Mason, attempted to rally surviving contacts and considered ways to preserve selected ideas without recreating the old structure. Adolf von Knigge, who had earlier helped expand the order, remained estranged and did not return to leadership. On the government side, Karl Theodor, Elector of Bavaria, approved the edicts that prohibited secret affiliations and authorized searches. Ernest II, Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, extended protection to Weishaupt and placed limits to avoid further conflict. In the sphere of public debate, Augustin Barrel, a French abbé and polemicist, and John Robison, a Scottish professor, wrote widely circulated books that linked the Illuminati to broader European upheavals. In the American reception, Timothy Dwight, president of Yale College, and Jedediah Morse, a congregational minister, drew on Barriol and Robison in sermons that spread the theme of hidden influence. Each of these figures occupied different positions in a network shaped by police files, printers' shops, and the political demands of the 1790s. The immediate sequence of events began with warnings to Bavarian officials about secret associations, followed by edicts in 1784 and 1785 that forbade civic and religious officials from taking part. After initial arrests and denunciations, investigators traced correspondence and minutes to several private houses. In 1786, police searched Zwack's residence in Landshut and seized boxes of papers, including initiation rituals, lectures and letters that detailed the structure of grades and the intended moral and educational goals of the order. Additional searches uncovered similar collections in other towns. The material confirmed that members had used classical pseudonyms, had organized themselves under a system of surveillance and reports, and had discussed strategies to influence the content of instruction and the tone of learned societies. The government published a selection of these documents in 1787, under a title that presented them as original writings of the order. Printers issued the volume in Munich, and extracts circulated beyond Bavaria. The publication gave critics a foundation for claims about anti-clerical aims and political agitation. It also allowed former members to argue that the texts had been taken out of context, or that the more radical sketches had never been converted into action. During these developments, Weishaupt left Bavaria and reached Gotha, where he received support and limited freedom to write. He composed defenses of his program and tried, in cautious language, to distinguish the educational and moral parts of his plan from the accusations of sedition. Bode kept in contact with sympathetic Masons and travelled within German lands to assess whether a continuation under altered names or lighter forms could survive. The broader development over the next decade drew the order into the era's largest political narrative. The outbreak of the French Revolution gave Barruel and Robeson the subject they sought to connect with earlier German events. Barruel published memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism, and Robeson issued proofs of a conspiracy against all the religions and governments of Europe. Both authors used the Bavarian documents and added testimony from Masons and travellers to draw a line from the Illuminati to revolutionary clubs. They asserted that methods of recruitment, surveillance, and secular moral instruction had prepared minds for radical change. Their books found a ready audience in a Europe already unsettled by war and by the displacement of older orders. Reviews and reprints carried their claims into England and Scotland, and translations introduced them to German readers alongside the official volumes that had launched the initial controversy. Bode died in 1793, and with his death went one of the few remaining coordinators who understood the inner workings of the late order. Weishaupt remained in Gotha, and kept to a routine of writing and family life under the Duke's protection. He did not rebuild the organization. In several German states, former members moved into administrative or academic posts and avoided public discussion of the past. The lodges that had once assisted recruitment continued their own work, often under stricter supervision after waves of suspicion. The suggested link between the Illuminati and the Jacobins became a frequent claim in pamphlets, but contemporary evidence that the order directed revolutionary events did not appear in official records. The pattern repeated elsewhere. Assertions travelled farther and faster than documentation, and the Illuminati became a shorthand term for hidden direction rather than a specific society with a current address. The Atlantic reception extended the controversy. In the late 1790s, Morse preached sermons in New England that cited Robeson and warned of hidden networks. Dwight addressed similar themes to students and congregations in Connecticut. Printers in Boston, Hartford, and New Haven republished extracts and commentaries. Newspapers echoed the debate, and local clubs took sides based on broader Federalist and Republican divisions. The label Illuminati entered American political vocabulary as a general name for perceived subversives. The intensity of the panic receded in the early years of the 19th century as immediate threats failed to materialize and as domestic issues took precedence. The episode demonstrated how the Bavarian papers, the polemical books, and the anxieties of a revolutionary age had combined to give an obscure Bavarian society a role in arguments far from its origin. Meanwhile, in German-speaking lands, surviving members adjusted to new circumstances. Some pursued civil careers, some retired from public life. Weishaupt published texts that presented his thinking in broader philosophical terms and lived out his years under the same ducal protection that had sheltered him in the first place. Police files remained in archives and provided the core of knowledge for future historians. The original hierarchy dissolved entirely. No meeting minutes or membership lists from the 1790s showed renewed central direction. Where ideas about education, religious tolerance, and administrative reform persisted, they did so as part of a wider Enlightenment legacy, not as instructions issued from a hidden command. Later accounts drew attention to episodes that could not be firmly verified. One strand claimed that Bode had carried elements of the order to Paris lodges shortly before the Revolution. Surviving correspondence offered partial references to journeys and discussions, but did not provide conclusive evidence of formal transmission. Another line argued that certain clubs and reading societies in German cities maintained secret chapters under new names. In each case, the documentation remained limited, and modern scholars treated these stories with caution. The known facts indicated that after 1787, the order no longer met as a coherent body, and that most activity took the form of writing and private friendships. Within Freemasonry, the experience of the mid-1780s led to stronger internal distinctions between ritual and political debate. Some lodges codified apolitical rules, others broadened lectures on moral improvement and left public controversies aside. Governments used the example of the Illuminati to justify stricter oversight of associations, contributing to a climate in which secret orders became political subjects even when their activities were social or charitable. The term Illuminati thus moved from a precise organizational name to a flexible symbol employed in pamphlets and speeches across Europe and North America. One contextual note helped explain the durability of the legend. The late 18th and early 19th centuries brought rapid change, including revolutions, wars, and administrative reforms that altered daily life. In such conditions, the idea of a hidden coordinator offered a simple framework for complex events. Barrel and Robeson supplied narratives that matched this need. The Bavarian government's publication of seized papers gave those narratives a factual base, even though the original materials described a short-lived project focused on education, elite networking, and anti-clerical critique. Later writers reused the same texts to support new claims. The name Illuminati appeared in different languages and contexts, and acquired associations not present in the original statutes. Groups in the 19th century that adopted similar names did so without direct continuation from Weishaupt's order. Their practices belonged to separate traditions. Chapter 5. Edicts and Exposures in Bavaria. The Bavarian suppression of the Illuminati marked a decisive turn from quiet expansion to public unmasking and forced decline. The chapter traced the way civil edicts, police searches, and printed disclosures brought a secretive network into the open and pushed its members into retreat. It followed the sequence from initial state suspicion to formal outlawry, and from clandestine correspondence to seized archives in government hands. It also noted how the name of the order spread far beyond Bavaria once the documents were printed and discussed, turning a regional crackdown into a topic of broader European debate. The outcome in legal and practical terms was the dismantling of the order as a functioning organization within a few years. The setting lay in electoral Bavaria during the mid-1780s, centered on Munich as the seat of government and on university towns such as Ingolstadt and Landshut where many members lived and worked. The broader context included neighboring German states within the Holy Roman Empire, where news, books, and people moved across borders with relative ease. Legal and religious regulations shaped the environment. Since the Bavarian court maintained close ties to Catholic authorities and kept a watchful eye on schools and lodges, police powers extended to searches and censorship, and the court press could publish official findings. When the crackdown unfolded, key episodes took place in government offices in Munich and in private homes in Landshut and other towns, while exiles found protection in courts such as Gotha. The principal figures included Adam Weishaupt, the professor of canon law at Ingolstadt, who had founded the order and guided its inner doctrines. He worked with Adolf Freiherr von Knigge, an energetic organizer who had brought in members and adapted the grades, though the two men later fell into dispute over authority and methods. The ruler was Karl Theodor, Elector of Bavaria, who issued the edicts that forbade secret associations and targeted the Illuminati by name. Franz Xaver von Zwack, a lawyer and diligent administrator of the order in Landshut, kept extensive papers that later became central to the exposure. Johann Christoph Bode, a respected Freemason who had associated with the Illuminati, tried to maintain ties in northern Germany when the Bavarian center weakened. Clerical advisors and court officials acted as the state's eyes and hands, investigating, reporting, and carrying out searches. Their relationships formed a triangle of pressure. The order's leaders sought to preserve secrecy and coherence. The ruler and his ministers aimed to reassert control, and Masonic circles struggled to avoid being drawn into the conflict. The setup moved along two converging lines: internal friction and external suspicion. Within the order, disagreements between Weishaupt and Knigge sharpened over curriculum, discipline, and decision-making, leading to Knigge's resignation and the loss of an effective recruiter. Outside the order, the Bavarian court reacted to a climate of unease about lodges, clubs, and reading societies that exchanged bold ideas without official oversight. In 1784, the Elector published a general edict against unauthorized societies, which increased pressure on Freemasonry and created a legal framework that could be turned against the Illuminati. Reports circulated that the group had infiltrated lodges and sought to influence government policy, which increased anxiety at court. By early 1785, a new edict prohibited the Illuminati specifically, naming the order and threatening penalties for continued membership. University superiors received instructions to identify professors and students who belonged. Weishaupt lost his position at Ingolstadt and faced prosecution, and several members weighed the risks of remaining linked to a banned association. The development turned on the discovery and publication of documentary evidence. In 1786, Bavarian officials searched the residence of Franz Xaver von Zwack in Landshut and seized a large cache of papers. The archives included correspondence, rosters, initiation texts, and instructions that detailed the inner workings of the order. The government prepared edited volumes of these papers, which appeared in print the following year, and made the Illuminati's grades and aims a matter of public reading. The publication embarrassed former members who held court or academic posts and undermined private denials. Weishaupt fled Bavaria and received protection at the court of Duke Ernest II in Gotha, where he continued to write defenses and explanations of the order's intentions. Some members recanted, others withdrew quietly, and a few attempted to keep lines of contact alive across the German states. Bode's efforts to preserve a network north of Bavaria met with limited success, since the loss of secrecy and the climate of suspicion discouraged organized activity. By the late 1780s, the Illuminati no longer functioned as a coherent order in Bavaria, and its former leaders lived under surveillance or in exile. The outcome reached beyond legal dissolution. The printed papers allowed critics to cite chapter and verse in attacks on secret combinations, while sympathizers pointed to passages that emphasized moral education and mutual improvement. Freemasons, who had provided a recruiting ground, suffered collateral scrutiny, and in places faced restrictions or closures. Clergy and court advisors used the case to argue for tighter control of schools and reading societies. The name Illuminati moved into the vocabulary of pamphleteers and journalists across Europe, often detached from its Bavarian origin and applied to a range of radical or reformist circles. Claims that the order continued in hidden form persisted in rumor, but contemporary evidence for an organized survival in Bavaria after the seizures was not produced. The suppression thus closed one chapter of organizational history while opening a new era in which the Illuminati existed largely in print, in memory, and in controversy. The broader cultural context included a long record of church and state efforts to regulate secret fraternities, with earlier papal condemnations of Freemasonry shaping Catholic regions like Bavaria. Differences between jurisdictions mattered, since some German princes tolerated lodges while others followed Bavaria's example and tightened controls in the same period. Variants of the story spread quickly, and later authors added interpretations that went beyond the documents published by the court. Some writers in the following decade would connect the Bavarian order to political upheavals in France, while others confined the topic to debates over education and censorship. What remained clear in the historical record was that the Bavarian edicts, the Landshut seizure, and the subsequent publications brought the Illuminati into full view and ended its organized presence where it began. Chapter 6. Restoration Echoes and the Spread of a Legend. 19th century politics and print culture carried the name of the Illuminati far beyond its Bavarian origin, turning a dissolved order into a recurring reference point in debates about revolution, religion, and secrecy. The meaning of the name shifted from a specific 18th century society to a broader symbol used by clergy, police, and pamphleteers to describe perceived networks of subversion. The period saw the label applied to diverse movements, from student clubs to national conspirators, and it framed arguments about the risks posed by hidden associations in modern states. The idea traveled transatlantic routes, entered sermons and newspapers, and circulated through translated books. The result was a durable legend that outlived the organization that had inspired it, and a vocabulary that shaped how governments and citizens argued about change. The setting centered on post-Napoleonic Europe and the expanding public sphere of the United States. After 1815, the Congress of Vienna re-established monarchies and promoted stability across Central and Western Europe. Austria, Prussia, and many German states tightened control over universities and publications. In Italian states and in parts of France and Spain, secret societies responded to censorship and repression by organizing quietly. Britain experienced its own debates over clubs, reform, and the press. Across the Atlantic, a rapidly growing United States developed a lively partisan press and a culture of voluntary associations. In both continents, cities and universities served as hubs for ideas about rights, faith, and sovereignty. The decade rhythm moved from 1815 through the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, with moments of revolt followed by periods of crackdown. The geography of rumor and policing overlapped with the geography of print. Principal figures were a mixture of surviving personalities from the 18th century and new leaders shaped by Restoration politics. Adam Weishaupt lived under protection in Gotha and died in 1830. He defended his ideas in print but did not rebuild his order. Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian statesman, coordinated post-war settlements and favored strong measures against dissent. Augustin Barruel and John Robison, authors from the 1790s, were dead, but their books remained influential in clerical and conservative circles. Giuseppe Mazzini emerged as an organizer of national movements in the Italian peninsula, first among the Carbonari and later through Young Italy. In German lands, student fraternities known as Burschenschaften experimented with patriotic and liberal programs that attracted police attention. In the United States, the disappearance of William Morgan in 1826 drew Thurlow Weed and other reformers into an anti-Masonic campaign. William Wirt became the anti-Masonic presidential candidate in 1832. John Quincy Adams published letters on Freemasonry in 1833. Joseph von Sedelnitsky led the Austrian police, compiling reports that treated secret associations as systemic threats. Preachers, journalists, and local officials filled in the rest of the cast, repeating names and themes across sermons, pamphlets, and dossiers. Key developments began with the settlement that followed Napoleon's fall. The restored monarchies faced a generation that had grown up amid wars and new claims about citizenship. In 1819, the Carlsbad Decrees imposed press censorship and university supervision across the German Confederation. Police reports often connected dissenting students, suspicious reading circles, and former Jacobin contacts with the earlier Illuminati, using the label as a shorthand for coordination and irreligion. Pamphleteers reprinted Barruel and Robertson, citing them as sourcebooks for interpreting current unrest. In the Italian states, the Carbonari formed cells that sought constitutional changes. Opponents, and some defectors described them as heirs to the Illuminati, despite differences in origin and purpose. The revolutions of 1830 in France and Italy fed these associations, and officials again invoked the language of Enlightenment conspiracies. Within this climate, the older Bavarian story was preserved as a cautionary tale about what secret oaths and rationalist critique could produce in politics. Across the Atlantic, a specific incident turned suspicion into a structured political movement. William Morgan, who had announced a book on Masonic rituals, vanished in western New York in 1826. Trials convicted several local Freemasons of conspiracy and kidnapping. Newspapers covered the case widely. Editors and orators drew on Robertson's claims to argue that Masonic secrecy and Illuminati methods were linked, asserting a chain from 18th-century Bavaria to contemporary lodges. The anti-Masonic party formed, held conventions and nominated candidates. William Wirt accepted its presidential nomination in 1832, giving the movement national visibility. John Quincy Adams, now a former president, wrote a series of letters opposing Freemasonry on moral and civic grounds. Anti-Masonic newspapers circulated stories of oaths, signs, and supposed plots, blending local grievances with imported narratives about the Illuminati. The episode did not require evidence of a living Bavarian order. It rested on the idea that any secret fraternity could shelter coordinated influence and erode public accountability, and that past warnings offered a ready frame for present events. Outcomes varied by region but moved in a similar direction. In Central Europe, governments maintained surveillance and censorship through mid-century, and police files continued to use the term Illuminati for patterned opposition. The revolutions of 1848 drew broad coalitions into the streets. Officials connected outbreaks to webs of clubs and exiles, while radicals traded their own explanations of repression and betrayal. The term Illuminati functioned as one label among several, alongside Carbonari, communists, and Republicans, depending on the speaker. After 1849, many activists emigrated or reorganized, and the label narrowed in official discourse as specific socialist and nationalist groups became better known. In the United States, the anti-Masonic party peaked early and merged into the Whig coalition by the mid-1830s. Freemasonry survived and adapted in most states, while public suspicion of hidden cliques persisted in phases. The long tale of the Morgan affair kept the link between Masonic secrecy and the older Illuminati story alive in popular literature. The death of Weishaupt in 1830 closed the original biographical thread, while former members generally lived quiet lives or pursued ordinary careers. The name Illuminati remained available as a rhetorical device, even when the people using it had little connection to the Bavarian case. It described an anxiety about unseen coordination more than a traceable organization, and it offered a flexible way to explain complex events. Contextual variations shaped how the label worked. Catholic ultramontane writers used Illuminati as a general term for Enlightenment errors and anti-clerical networks, citing Barruel. Protestant moralists in Britain and the United States used it to warn against oath-bound associations that seemed to rival church and state. Police bureaucracies in German and Austrian lands grouped student clubs, reading circles, and reform lodges under the same heading in internal memoranda. Radical activists sometimes mocked the term or adopted secret trappings pragmatically, recognizing that clandestine methods were tools under repression, not inheritances from Bavaria. No reliable evidence showed a continuous, organized Illuminati after its suppression in the 1780s. Where sources were lacking, officials and polemicists filled gaps with older books and current fears. By mid-century, the Bavarian order had become a historical reference, and the legend had become a convenient language. In that dual form, the Illuminati entered the second half of the 19th century, as both a documented episode and a migrating story, ready to meet new movements, new media, and new interpretations. Chapter 7. Cold War Shadows and Counterculture Mirrors. Cold War Anxieties and Countercultural Satire refocused the Illuminati myth between 1945 and 1979. In these decades, the name moved from older European fears into a broad American conversation about hidden power, surveillance, and social change. Writers and activists used the term to explain or critique events that felt coordinated from behind the scenes. Satirists and experimental artists also adopted the word, turning its dramatic weight into playful puzzles and cultural commentary. By the end of the period, the Illuminati had become a flexible symbol. It stood at once for a supposed secret elite, and for the idea that conspiracy stories could themselves be tools that shaped public belief. The setting stretched from the early post-war years to the end of the 1970s, with activity centered in the United States and, to a lesser degree, the United Kingdom. Bookstores carried inexpensive paperbacks that blended polemics and history. Magazine stands displayed essays, letters, and reports that debated credibility and evidence. University campuses hosted speakers who argued about the causes of war, the role of intelligence agencies, and the ethics of protest. Theater basements, coffee houses, and small publishers sustained a parallel world of satire, science fiction, and zines. Television news covered political scandals and congressional hearings with a steady rhythm that kept the subject of secrecy in the public eye. Exact circulation figures for many niche publications were not documented. The principal figures included Robert Welch, who founded the John Birch Society and promoted a view of coordinated subversion. William Guy Carr wrote about a global plot he linked to the historic Illuminati. Gary Allen circulated arguments about an insider network managing politics and finance. Richard Hofstadter analyzed conspiratorial thinking as a recurring style in American politics. Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea, editors and writers with ties to Playboy, reshaped the Illuminati as a literary device. Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley, co-founders of Discordianism, supplied source material and pranks that fed a culture of mix-and-match conspiracies. Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, launched an investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy that drew in Thornley and stirred public debate. Frank Church, a United States senator, chaired a committee that investigated intelligence abuses. In the United Kingdom, Ken Campbell and Chris Langham directed a stage adaptation of Wilson and Shea's work. These figures did not coordinate with one another, but their books, investigations, and performances overlapped in the public conversation. The progression began with print. In the 1950s, Carr's books, including Pawns in the Game, claimed that modern wars and revolutions resulted from a hidden plan that dated to the 18th century. His narrative placed the Illuminati at the center of a chain of events. Welch founded the John Birch Society in 1958 and argued that a small, disciplined enemy worked methodically through institutions. Allen's None Dare Call It Conspiracy, published in 1971, pushed the idea of a well-connected elite guiding both political parties and shaping foreign policy. Allen referred often to policy groups and banking circles, and sometimes echoed older Illuminati themes. These works circulated widely through conservative networks. They gave readers a vocabulary for connecting news events into a single pattern. As these ideas spread, skepticism and scholarly reflection also grew. Hofstadter published The Paranoid Style in American Politics in 1964, describing how grand conspiracy narratives rose during periods of stress. He did not deny real conspiracies. He examined instead how the style interpreted ordinary politics as deliberate plots. In the same decade, campus culture, satire, and underground publishing adopted the Illuminati motif in a different spirit. Hill and Thornley compiled the Principia Discordia in the mid-1960s. It mixed jokes, aphorisms, and playful rites, and suggested that disorder could be both principle and perspective. It treated the Illuminati as one story among many symbols to be rearranged. Wilson and Shea, working at Playboy, read letters from readers who debated hidden plots. They noted how independent claims linked distant events. They began writing fiction that included almost every theory they encountered, not to endorse them, but to show how they fit together inside a single narrative frame. Political shocks in the 1960s and 1970s created a harsher backdrop. The Kennedy assassination in 1963, followed by the killings of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, fostered widespread doubts about official accounts. The Warren Commission reported in 1964, but its conclusions did not satisfy many citizens. Garrison announced his own investigation in 1966 and brought charges in 1967. His case ended without a conviction. During the inquiry, he subpoenaed Thornley because Thornley had known Lee Harvey Oswald during their Marine service. The legal entanglement brought Discordian figures into a serious public arena and blurred lines between satire and state proceedings. In 1971, a group of activists exposed COINTELPRO, an FBI program that had infiltrated domestic groups. The news confirmed that agencies had secretly monitored activists. The Watergate scandal began in 1972 and led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon in 1974. In 1975, the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission investigated the intelligence community. They reported on covert actions and on programs such as MK Ultra. These revelations showed that hidden operations existed, even if they did not match popular conspiracy templates. They created space for the Illuminati to function as a shorthand for unseen influence. Wilson and Shea released the Illuminati's trilogy in 1975 through Dell Publishing. The 3 volumes, The Eye in the Pyramid, The Golden Apple, and Leviathan, braided fiction and reference. The authors included the historical Bavarian Illuminati as a plot element and drew in Discordian jokes, occult lore, libertarian themes, and political satire. Their story highlighted a pattern. Many readers already sorted the world through networks of secret connections, and a narrative that acknowledged this habit could invite reflection. Wilson and Shea did not claim to expose an actual Illuminati. They used the name to map how belief spread and how rumors multiplied. The books reached science fiction audiences and campus readers. They also found a path into theatre. In 1976, Campbell and Langham staged Illuminati with the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. The production presented the trilogy's sprawling scenes in a marathon performance. It turned the act of conspiracy reading into a social event. It showed that the Illuminati idea had crossed from pamphlets and paperbacks into live cultural practice. The triangle of polemic, scholarship, and satire produced a steady outcome by the late 1970s. On one side, Welch, Allen, and their allies framed the Illuminati as a concrete adversary, or at least as a useful name for an entrenched elite. On another side, Hofstadter and other scholars described why such storytelling appealed during periods of change. On a third side, Hill, Thornley, Wilson, and Shea embraced ambiguity and treated the Illuminati as a mutable tag. The public absorbed all 3 approaches at once. In bookstores, a reader could find a denunciation, an analysis, and a playful remix on the same shelf. On campuses and stage platforms, audiences encountered the same mixture. The reality of intelligence abuses added a flaw of plausibility without confirming any single grand design. By the end of the decade, the term Illuminati no longer pointed to a single coherent belief. It worked instead as a quick way to evoke a set of possibilities, that events might be coordinated by actors who were not visible, that narratives about those actors could be misleading or strategic, and that the idea of secret mastery could be used as either accusation or art. Cultural variants helped the idea travel. In the United States, the Illuminati blended with New World Order themes, with references to international institutions, and with broad skepticism towards centralized authority. In the United Kingdom, the theatre adaptation and science fiction communities gave the name a literary flavor. Continental European discourse retained echoes of earlier worries about secret societies and revolutionary cells. Across these settings, the motif aligned with local concerns. It attached to banking in some circles, to media in others, and to youth culture in still others. Exact boundaries between sincere belief and ironic performance were not always clear to observers. For many participants, that uncertainty was part of the appeal. The 1970s closed with the Illuminati seated securely in the vocabulary of both protest and play, prepared to shift again as new media and new subcultures took shape. Chapter 8. From message boards to mainstream pop culture. The idea of the Illuminati moved widely through the early internet and entered mainstream entertainment during the 1990s and 2000s. It shifted from a niche topic in print and small communities to a flexible label for modern fears about elite coordination. The term gathered new meanings as it circulated through novels, films, radio shows, and online forums. It attached itself to broader narratives about globalization, surveillance, and the consolidation of political and corporate power. As it traveled, it lost historical precision and gained cultural visibility. By the end of the decade, the label functioned more as a modern myth and meme than as a reference to the 18th century society. The setting grew out of the post-Cold War world and the rapid expansion of consumer technology. Dial-up connections linked homes to bulletin boards and Usenet in the early 1990s. Then broadband and Wi-Fi brought faster access by the 2000s. The United States and Western Europe hosted much of the early commercial internet infrastructure, though usage spread globally by the end of the decade. The political backdrop included US militia movements, the 1993 siege near Waco, the 1995 bombing in Oklahoma City, and the security transformations after the attacks of September 11, 2001. Popular television and cinema explored secrecy, clandestine agencies, and shadowy plots, creating a shared vocabulary for suspicion and wonder. Within this environment, the word Illuminati floated among related terms such as New World Order and global elites, often without clear definition. New platforms provided minimal editorial oversight, and anonymous participation shaped tone and content. The principal figures for this period included writers, broadcasters, game designers, and platform founders whose work intersected with conspiracy themes. Dan Brown published Angels and Demons in 2000 and presented a fictionalized Illuminati with Vatican intrigue, then reached a larger audience with the Da Vinci Code in 2003. David Icke continued to weave expansive narratives about hidden rulers, drawing attention on the lecture circuit and online. Alex Jones built an audience as a radio and internet broadcaster and circulated claims about elite gatherings and clandestine decisions. Steve Jackson Games, a US publisher, had already created the satirical Illuminati card game and later expanded it into Illuminati New World Order, which players and commentators cited in discussions about real-world events. Online communities such as Usenet groups, Above Top Secret, and later 4chan provided hubs for speculation and satire. YouTube, launched in 2005, became a major repository for videos weaving archival clips, graphic overlays, and music to tell conspiratorial stories. Within the music industry, artists such as Jay-Z, Beyoncé, and Rihanna were named in rumors that assigned symbolic meanings to performances and visuals. The parties named denied such claims. No governmental agency identified an operative organization descended from the Bavarian Illuminati, and no authenticated documents demonstrated continuity with that society. Several events set the stage for new narratives to take root. In 1990, the United States Secret Service seized materials from Steve Jackson Games during a wider investigation into computer crime. Federal court later ruled in 1993 that the raid had violated the publisher's rights, and the company received damages. Commentators cited this conflict as evidence of heavy-handed secrecy, even though it did not relate directly to the Illuminati. The mid-1990s brought a cluster of popular entertainment that mapped easily onto conspiracy frames, with The X-Files 1993-2002, dramatizing a hidden government and alien cover-ups, and The Matrix 1999, suggesting concealed realities and controlled perception. Militia-era concerns about black helicopters and United Nations overreach gave the phrase New World Order new energy in grassroots newsletters and talk radio. The 1994 release of Illuminati New World Order provided a satirical reference set of cards that named institutions, plots, and symbols, which enthusiasts later compared to real headlines in a retrospective pattern. As the millennium turned, Brown's novel offered a glossy version of an Illuminati revival, and its success ensured that the word reached readers who had never encountered it in historical sources. After the September 11th attacks, online speculation escalated across forums and nascent social media. Video documentaries such as Loose Change, first released in 2005, reached large audiences on YouTube and other sites. Zeitgeist, the movie, 2007, blended critiques of finance, religion, and governance, and many viewers connected it to New World Order themes. The 2008 financial crisis amplified suspicions about centralized financial power, and protesters and bloggers revived interest in closed-door meetings such as the annual Bilderberg Group conference, which journalists had already documented. Alex Jones released footage from a visit to Bohemian Grove in 2000, showing a private ritual that he described in sinister terms. Critics debated interpretation, but the material circulated widely as visual proof of elite secrecy. These episodes encouraged the habit of treating disparate facts as coordinated signs. The emerging blogosphere, comment threads, and early feeds on MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter made linking and resharing an effortless routine. In that environment, the word Illuminati served as a shorthand that joined financial, political, and cultural concerns into a single all-purpose label. By the late 2000s, rumors about the Illuminati reached music, television, celebrity magazines, and global fan communities. Viewers paused videos to examine triangles, checkerboard floors, and eye imagery, and then uploaded breakdowns that assigned meaning to choreography, stage sets, and logos. Artists named in these interpretations denied involvement, and journalists interviewed directors and designers who described aesthetic choices without hidden intent. Clips and listicles traveled across continents and languages, and audiences in West Africa, the Caribbean, and parts of Latin America added local examples and moral codes to the narrative. On English-language forums, users mixed earnest belief with irony, and for the lulz, humor made satire difficult to distinguish from conviction. Recommendation algorithms favored high-engagement content, and sensational titles and thumbnails drew repeated clicks. Fact-checking articles explained the history of the Bavarian Illuminati, and traced the evolution of the symbol of the eye within European and American art and currency. Yet corrections traveled more slowly than memes. The 2009 film adaptation of Angels and Demons refreshed the topic for a global audience and linked it to tourist images of Rome and the Vatican. By the end of the decade, the Illuminati label functioned as a portable storyline that could be attached to almost any image of wealth, influence, or spectacle. In cultural terms, the period showed how the Illuminati migrated from footnote to fiction, from fiction to talk radio, and from talk radio to participatory online culture. In different regions, it absorbed local anxieties about corruption, foreign influence, or rapid social change. In the Middle East and North Africa, commentators sometimes merged it with anti-Western narratives. In sub-Saharan Africa, pastors and musicians appeared in rumor cycles that warned of dangerous bargains. In Eastern Europe, it overlapped with memories of secret police and state surveillance. In East and Southeast Asia, adaptations drew on corporate hierarchies and celebrity culture. Scholars and educators distinguished between the documented 18th century order and the modern mythology, and they described the latter as a case study in networked folklore. Law enforcement agencies did not present evidence of a continuous organization that matched the popular image. The idea settled into global culture as a versatile story about power and secrecy, ready to be shaped by the next generation of platforms and events. Chapter 9: Screens, Symbols, and the Internet Age. The late 20th and early 21st centuries marked a shift in how the Illuminati appeared in public life, moving from printed polemics and niche subcultures into mass entertainment and everyday online conversation. The name became a shorthand for hidden power and elaborate plots, invoked in humor, suspicion, and occasional fear. As digital platforms connected distant communities, older narratives about a secret order were reassembled, summarized, and circulated at high speed. The historical Bavarian Illuminati remained a brief Enlightenment society, yet the term gained a new role as a versatile label for unseen influence. This chapter traced how the idea adapted to new technologies, how it attached to celebrity culture, and how it settled into the vocabulary of the Internet age. The setting spanned the 1990s through the 2010 FOS, when cable television, talk radio, home video, and early websites blended into a global media environment. Dial-up modems and message boards in the 1990s gave way to search engines, blogs, and video sharing in the 2000s, followed by smartphone apps and social networks in the 2010s. Geographic boundaries blurred as the same clip could be viewed in many countries within minutes. Urban and rural audiences shared memes that ignored national borders. The tone and speed of communication favored short, repeatable claims and striking images. When users encountered references to the Illuminati, they were often framed by quick cuts, dramatic music, and captions designed for brief attention spans. The exact reach of specific posts and videos remained unknown, as platform metrics changed over time and were not consistently archived. Several figures and institutions shaped this period's narratives. The 18th century founder Adam Weishaupt appeared mainly as a historical reference point in both scholarship and rumor. On the side of fiction and satire, authors like Robert Anton Wilson and Umberto Eco had already presented layered treatments of conspiracy themes, and their influence lingered in later media. Broadcasters such as William Cooper and Alex Jones used radio, then websites and streaming, to present recurring claims about hidden elites, often using the word Illuminati as a flexible label. Filmmaker Dylan Avery's name became associated with online 9/11 documentaries that attracted large audiences. In popular music, performers such as Jay-Z, Beyoncé, Kanye West, Rihanna, and Lady Gaga appeared in discussions that linked visual motifs to supposed signs of membership, though the artists themselves made no historical connection to the Bavarian group. On the research and education side, scholars like Michael Barkun and Joseph Usinski analyzed the spread of conspiratorial beliefs, while journalists such as John Ronson examined the culture around them. Organizations like Snopes and major newsrooms published debunking articles and explainers. Technology companies including Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter hosted the content and shaped its visibility through recommendation systems and trending lists. Their policies and algorithms influenced which references gained momentum, while fact-checkers and educators tried to counter inaccurate claims. Key developments emerged in the transitional years of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Talk radio and VHS recordings circulated elaborate scenarios about world government, banking cartels, and secret orders, with the term Illuminati used interchangeably with older categories like the Freemasons or the Trilateral Commission. Television dramas, including The X-Files, treated conspiracy as a narrative device, reinforcing a shared sense of hidden patterns. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, online forums and file-sharing networks hosted speculative videos that attributed the events to complex plots. Titles like Loose Change reached large audiences on early video platforms, mixing archival footage with commentary and captions. The word Illuminati appeared in tags, titles, and comment threads, even when the content did not mention the 18th century group. Early social forums on sites like Above Top Secret, early Reddit communities, and image boards hosted long threads that stitched together symbols from currency, corporate logos, and architecture into webs of meaning. As more people experimented with basic video editing, homemade exposure clips became common, pointing to triangles, hand signs, and the eye in the pyramid motif as supposed proof of a controlling order. These trends intensified in the 2010s with the rise of smartphones, social media feeds, and algorithmic video recommendations. Music videos and award show performances became focal points for speculation. Jay-Z's Rockefeller hand gesture, shaped like a diamond, was interpreted by some viewers as a pyramid sign, and screenshots circulated as supposed evidence. Lady Gaga's theatrical imagery, Rihanna's stage sets, and Kanye West's visual experiments added new material for clip makers who paused frames and drew circles around shapes, eyes, and gestures. Artists responded in different ways. Some ignored the chatter, some joked about it in lyrics or interviews, some flipped the symbolism as part of a performance persona. The interpretations came from viewers rather than from any historical continuity with Weishaupt's organization. But the label Illuminati persisted because it was simple and familiar. Brands and entertainers used the word as a joke or marketing hook, reinforcing its place in pop culture. A well-known fast food chain ran an ad campaign that referenced Belluminati, using dollar bill iconography to parody the idea of a moneyed cabal. Commentators on late-night television and sketch shows used the theme for comedy. The term moved from accusation to punchline and back again depending on context. As the decade progressed, broader currents of online politics and misinformation drew on the same vocabulary. During periods of economic uncertainty and social strain, the word Illuminati often served as a convenient label for perceived elite coordination. Posts and videos linked it to banking families, technology executives, or political donors, usually without evidence. New conspiracy movements added layers to the story. Claims about secret pedophile rings, coded signals, and staged events drew selectively from older anti-elitist narratives and rebranded them for new audiences. The label Illuminati remained flexible enough to attach to these claims, appearing in hashtags, thumbnails, and commentary. Journalists and researchers traced how recommendation systems funneled curious viewers from harmless pop culture rumors to more extreme content. Platform companies revised policies and adjusted algorithms to limit harmful misinformation, though such measures moved slowly and produced uneven results. Teachers reported that students repeated simple Illuminati motifs learned from memes and music videos, so they developed media literacy lessons that used these examples to explain source evaluation. A precise measure of the outcome on public trust could not be calculated. As surveys varied and interpretations differed, academic and historical perspectives offered context during this period of rapid myth-making. Historians emphasized that the Bavarian Illuminati had operated for less than a decade in the late 18th century, aiming to reform education and politics within Enlightenment currents, and that the order was dismantled by the 1780s. Archivists catalogued remaining documents, and museums displayed materials related to Weishaupt and his circle, keeping the historical record clear. Scholars of religion and political science examined why grand conspiracy narratives persisted, pointing to cognitive patterns, community formation, and the appeal of simple explanations for complex events. Media studies outlined how visual motifs, like the eye within a triangle, persisted because they were easy to recognize and reuse. Fact-checking organizations built reference pages that explained common claims and their origins. Their articles showed how images from music videos or fashion were edited and captioned to fit pre-existing beliefs. The distinction between the historical Illuminati and the modern use of the word became a recurring reminder in these resources. Readers who followed the documented history learned that a sharp break separated the 18th century order from the Internet-era label. Regional variations gave the term local color and different meanings. In parts of Latin America, the Illuminati label overlapped with older suspicion toward Freemasonry and national elites, and it appeared in talk shows and blogs with strong political overtones. In the Middle East and North Africa, Illuminati motifs sometimes merged with narratives about Western influence and regional conflicts, with satellite channels and forums echoing each other's phrasing. In West Africa, rumors blended discussions of wealth, music success, and occult initiation, and interviews with artists often included obligatory denials. In parts of Europe, the term circulated alongside references to the Bilderberg Group or the European Union, depending on national concerns. Russian and Eastern European media sometimes invoked hidden elites in ways aligned with domestic political narratives. These variants rarely relied on archival sources. They tended to reuse images, translations and captions from English-language content, then adapt them to local news cycles. Through many languages and media formats, the name Illuminati endured as a versatile signifier, far removed from the small 18th century society that had once carried it. Chapter 10. Modern Myths and Historical Traces. The later history of the Illuminati centered on the difference between what the historical order had been and what people imagined it to be. After the Bavarian suppression, the name traveled far beyond its original context and gathered new meanings. Political writers, novelists, activists and entertainers used the name to explain revolutions, to warn about hidden influences, or to add intrigue to stories. Scholars examined surviving documents and reconstructed the order as a short-lived product of the Enlightenment. By the early 21st century, the word Illuminati described both a documented 18th century society and a vast modern myth that had grown around it. The course of this modern afterlife showed how an obscure organization became a lasting symbol in public culture. The setting stretched from late 18th century Europe to a global media environment. Early debates took place in Germany, France and Britain, where printers, clergy and officials handled seized papers and polemical books. In the 19th century, pamphlet networks and newspapers extended the story across Europe and North America. In the mid-20th century, radio, magazines and television carried new claims during moments of political tension. In Britain, the Robertson legacy appeared in studies of scientific institutions and public fear. In the United States, the term became part of culture war vocabulary and pop branding. In Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia, internet forums mixed global references with local stories about elites, finding in the Illuminati label a way to talk about power and exclusion. These varied uses showed how a European 18th century subject could be reworked to fit many cultural contexts, often by detaching the name from its original members and aims. By the present day, the consensus in research communities held that the Bavarian Illuminati ended as an active organization in the late 1780s. There was no verified evidence of a continuous institutional line into the 19th, 20th or 21st centuries. Groups that adopted the name in modern times operated independently, without documentary ties to Adam Weishaupt or to the old statutes. Claims of hidden continuity were not supported by archival records. When new assertions appeared online, they repeated patterns that scholars had already documented in earlier waves of rumor. The historical material remained stable, founding in 1776, growth and internal debates, suppression and publication of documents, and dispersal. The mythic material remained flexible and continued to evolve with each generation's media. As a broader pattern, stories about hidden wise men, secret councils, or enlightened orders existed in many cultures, both before and after the Bavarian Illuminati. The specific name carried the weight of a distinct 18th century episode, but the narrative frame extended beyond it. Some modern organizations and media projects used the name as a brand, with no claim to historical descent. Independent verification of their internal workings was not available. The study of the Illuminati in this period rested on clear distinctions between documented past and imaginative present. In that careful separation, the record of the small order in Bavaria remained secure, while its echo in modern culture continued to travel widely and change shape, a steady reminder of how history and myth could share a single name. From the late 20th century into the present, the internet, social platforms and streaming services enabled constant circulation of both academic work and rumors. Archival materials were held in state repositories in Munich and other German cities, and printed sources sat in major research libraries. When specific private discussions occurred out of view, details remained undocumented. The key figures of this modern era were not members of the 18th century order, but interpreters and transmitters of its story. Augustin de Baruel, a French cleric, and John Robeson, a Scottish professor, published influential anti-Illuminati books in 1797 and 1798. Their claims persisted in later reprints and summaries. In the 20th century, Robert Welch and the John Birch Society linked the name Illuminati to communist plots, influencing segments of American conservative thought. Writers Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson used the theme for satirical and speculative fiction in the Illuminati's trilogy in 1975, which helped popularize playful and conspiratorial uses of the term. Novelists such as Dan Brown later adopted the name for contemporary thrillers, bringing it to a broad readership. On the scholarly side, René Le Forestier, J. M. Mu Forestier, Roberts, Monica Neugebauer-Welk, and Hermann Schuttler assembled archival evidence, corrected earlier errors, and published member lists and institutional histories. Libraries, archives, and historical societies in Germany and beyond served as sources for these researchers. Popular musicians, filmmakers, and internet creators used the imagery, while educators and journalists explained the differences between myth and history. These roles often overlapped in the public sphere, shaping how the name was understood. The progression of modern claims began with the immediate post-revolutionary period. Barruel and Robeson argued that the Bavarian Illuminati had continued in secret and had guided the French Revolution. Their assertions fit the fears of the 1790s and were cited by loyalist and clerical writers. During the 19th century, the memory of the Illuminati merged with debates about Freemasonry, secret societies, and social unrest. Some critics of Masonry used the term Illuminati to suggest a larger hidden network, even as Masonic bodies and surviving records showed distinct organizations with different aims. In the United States, the anti-Masonic movement of the 1820s and 1830s did not center on the Illuminati, but it added to the atmosphere in which claims about covert orders could spread. In Germany, conservative commentators repeated the idea of an ongoing Illuminati threat during certain political crises, although official investigations did not confirm a restored order with continuity from the original society. Mid-20th century politics revived the theme in new ways. During the early Cold War, Welch and colleagues presented the Illuminati as part of a long conspiracy leading to modern communism, a narrative that appeared in publications and speeches. The claims did not rest on new archival discoveries and were disputed by historians, but they reached organized audiences. The 1960s counterculture added a different layer. Discordian writers and pranksters seeded conspiracy letters and jocular references to the Illuminati, both as a critique of credulity and as a creative game. Shea and Wilson combined satire, occult lore, and social commentary in their novels, encouraging readers to see conspiracies as narrative devices rather than as proof of hidden governance. By the 1980s and 1990s, music videos, comic books, and role-playing games used pyramid eyes, secret handshakes, and coded symbols as visual shorthand for mystery and power. The Eye of Providence, which appeared on the Great Seal of the United States in 1782, and in earlier Christian art, was repeatedly misidentified as an Illuminati emblem, further binding unrelated symbols to the myth. The spread of these images reinforced recognition of the term even among audiences unfamiliar with the historical order. Academic work moved on a separate track, with patient efforts to document facts. Le Forestier's early 20th century study synthesized sources on the Illuminati and related German societies. Later, Roberts placed the order within the broader phenomenon of European secret associations. In the 1990s and beyond, Neugebauer, Volk, and Schuttler examined Bavarian police files, private papers, and printed tract collections. Schuttler compiled lists of verified members with dates and lodges, allowing a clearer view of social backgrounds and patterns of affiliation. These studies showed a cohort of intellectuals and officials concerned with educational reform, moral improvement, and political caution, rather than a group planning violent revolution. They also traced how the Bavarian government's raids, arrests, and publications in 1787 and 1788 fractured the order. The research underscored a consensus that the original Illuminati had not survived as an organized body past the late 1780s. When rumors of a restored order surfaced in later decades, scholars pointed to the absence of archival continuity. If any private clubs used the name informally in later centuries, independent confirmation was not available. At the turn of the 21st century, commercial entertainment renewed public interest. Brown's Angels and Demons presented an elaborate modern Illuminati with Catholic and scientific themes, producing a best-selling novel and film adaptation. Other films and television shows featured plots in which shadowy councils influenced world events, often borrowing terms from genuine 18th century societies without adhering to documented history. Musicians and fashion brands adopted triangles, single-eye motifs, and coded gestures as provocative design elements. Audiences debated meanings, and internet forums filled with decoding attempts. Viral videos treated editing choices and lighting effects as evidence of hidden membership. Online communities created detailed charts and lists connecting the Illuminati to banking, sports, and technology companies, usually by association and symbol reading rather than by documents. These practices made the Illuminati legend a collaborative project, produced by users as much as by traditional media. In this environment, a term that once described a small Enlightenment club became a name for a generalized idea of secret power. Journalists and educators addressed the topic in explanatory articles, museum exhibits, and classroom materials. Reporters visited archives and interviewed historians who handled original papers, then described how primary sources differed from online rumors. Teachers used the history of the Illuminati to demonstrate how evidence, context, and bias shaped narratives. Documentaries balanced interviews with scholars against segments showing how conspiracy networks formed and spread online. Public libraries curated reading lists that included both the 18th century sources and modern analyses of conspiracy culture. Universities hosted conferences on the Enlightenment and secrecy, with sessions on the Bavarian Order's pedagogy and organizational methods. These efforts did not remove the myth from popular culture, but they gave clearer maps for those who wanted to distinguish between the original society and later inventions. Government agencies occasionally appeared in the story, mainly as external references in public claims rather than as confirming witnesses. In the United States and Europe, law enforcement did not announce the discovery of a continuous Illuminati organization linked to the 18th century group. Public statements about extremist networks or disinformation campaigns sometimes used the word conspiracy in a general sense, which readers then misread as confirmation of Illuminati claims. Courts handled cases involving frauds that invoked secret society language, showing how the theme could be used to market scams. Regulators monitored advertising and online content where the name Illuminati became a brand for merchandise, subscription clubs, or entertainment promotions. None of these actions changed the historical outline set by scholars of the 18th century. The term functioned as a cultural label, not as proof of a surviving order. Digitization changed access to the foundations of the story. Bavarian state archives and research libraries catalogued and, in some cases, scanned 18th century police reports, seized letters, and official proclamations. University presses reissued critical editions of classic polemics with introductions and notes, helping readers understand how Barrel and Robeson worked and where their claims departed from evidence. Scholarly articles appeared in journals devoted to the Enlightenment and to the history of associations, refining knowledge about local cells, membership turnover, and the relationship between the Illuminati and Masonic lodges. Public-facing websites summarized these findings in plain language. The broader availability of the primary record positioned the 18th century Illuminati as a well-defined, finite case rather than an open channel into the present. The modern myth served social and psychological functions that historians could describe even when they could not trace direct lines of descent. It allowed storytellers to personify complex systems, such as finance and media, as agents with intent. It gave communities a shared vocabulary for suspicion, satire, and play. It offered a way to dramatize concerns about surveillance, globalization, and inequality. At the same time, it provided material for prejudice when old accusations were reused against minorities or political rivals. Analysts of disinformation studied how the Illuminati theme adapted to new events, becoming an empty container into which shifting anxieties were poured. As these studies circulated, they clarified how the idea could be influential without being institutionally real. The outcome was a layered picture, a documented 18th century society, post-1780s polemical shadow cast by critics, 20th century political narratives, and a 21st century entertainment and internet phenomenon. Across countries, the name attached itself to local debates. In Germany, the Illuminati were placed within histories of the Aufklärung and secret associations, with attention to schools, censorship, and church-state relations. In France, the post-revolutionary polemics remained a reference point for scholars studying counter-revolutionary thought. And so, dear knight, our tale comes to an end. May your rest be peaceful, and may dreams carry you to realms of wonder until we meet again.